So really excited to be here today. Thank you guys so much for coming. I just want to give a little introduction on why this subject. I've been running a podcast for the last 2 years about the relationship between stress and creativity. So what role stress plays in the creative process, and burnout is a huge aspect of that. What is burnout? And so we're going to get into that today, and we'll talk about the difference between that and stress, and all within the context of remote work, because we've got this new trend happening that is bringing remote work to the whole world, and we want to get into that, and what are the particular stresses and opportunities for burnout in this early stage remote work, how you want to set your company up. Really excited for your questions. Please think of some good questions and send them to me. That's my favorite part. So really excited for you guys to have you here. And we'll start with the panel and let them introduce themselves. Natalie, we can start with you.
Hi, I'm Natalie Nagele. I'm co-founder and CEO of Wildbit. We're an 18-year-old software company based in Philadelphia. Run 3 software as a service products. One's 11 years old, and then kind of newer ones over time. We are completely private. I run it with my husband, Chris. Bootstrapped, have been for 18 years. My team is remote first. We have 30 people, and we actually started the business completely remote 18 years ago, and now we have a small little headquarters in Philadelphia, but otherwise we run the entire company remote.
Really cool. Sean?
I'm Sean Blanda. I'm the Editorial Director of InVision, which is a prototyping and wireframing set of software. And I'm responsible for all the content marketing, so our blog, social media, and things like that. We're a fully remote team. I think we're 850 people. And I think we're the largest privately held remote company, or close to it.
I'm Amina AlTai. I'm a holistic business and mindset coach, and I work with both emerging entrepreneurs as well as people within organizations, and I take a mind, body, and career approach to living well, so examining any blocks that we might have in the mindset, what's happening in our bodies, and then the strategies and tactics we use in our career that set us up for success or not so much.
Great. Yeah, so it's a stacked panel here we have. So I want to start with, what is burnout to each of you? Give a small definition of what burnout is, maybe if you've experienced it before, what it is in your head. Natalie?
Sure. I think for me, burnout is that point where your mind can no longer produce quality work. So it's it's not stress, it's that inability to do that meaningful work that creates excitement and joy and all those things. So it's that kind of, we know that our brain's only capable of so much, and when you take it past that point, no matter how many hours you sit in front of the computer, you can't actually produce good work. So everything from your physical body starts to deteriorate, and also your just joy and excitement and fulfillment of the work that you're doing. So I think it's that kind of past the running where you just kind of start crashing.
Interesting. Sean?
I took the word burnout very literally, as in the match is burnout, and you cannot light it again no matter how hard you try, and there's diminishing returns. I think of energy like a bank account almost. You got to make some money and you can spend money, and some people are really good at making money quickly and spending it quickly and working 18 hours a day and perfectly fine. It's when you don't refuel and you're constantly dwindling down your reserves and you're just at zero, and then you're at negative, and then it feels like a retching child inside your chest. You can't even fathom of going back to work. I feel like that's burnout.
And Amina, I would love to hear your take on it, and also your take on the mind-body connection and the separateness or connection between those two things.
Yeah, great question. So I think of it as excessive efforting in a direction where we're having so much stress that it's impacting the mind and the body. And I had my own burnout. I co-founded a marketing agency in my early 20s and was taking care of clients and employees and not taking care of myself and working 80-hour weeks and chronic unmanaged stress. And it expressed itself as 2 autoimmune diseases, and there absolutely is a mind-body connection. And when our stress is unmanaged, our psychological stress and our physiological stress impacts the body at a cellular level and can express itself as disease.
That's really interesting. If anybody's curious about that, I'd look into the epigenetics and how our behavior starts to regulate the expression of our genes, and actually does have a physiological effect on us. Sean, what are your stress triggers, and how has that changed over time?
Oh man, I feel like the reason most of us work or found a company, there's lots of reasons, but they're generally two buckets, right? One is you want to make some sort of positive impact on the world, as defined by you, and one you want to grow yourself, whether that's improving your life or your family's life or to learn. And the triggers for me when neither of those two things are happening, like when I wake up in the morning and I look in the mirror and I go, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? I don't understand. I can't see the next step of what I'm doing, and I feel like I'm spinning my wheels. So I guess a foreboding sense of my own mortality is my burnout trigger.
Let's do it.
Very deep.
Yeah.
Amina, would you like to respond to that too, or what are
Yeah,
your
for
stress triggers?
sure. Triggers, so many. So when I had my marketing agency, lack of boundaries was a really big trigger for me, and that really impacted my burnout. And I would say when I came to my second career, which is the career that I'm in now, one of the hardest parts was kind of finding my particular niche. And I have a framework that I take emerging entrepreneurs through to help them find their way. And it's layering our gifts, our values, what brings us joy, what we want to impact, and what we do. And for the longest time, I was unclear on what I wanted to impact. So I was efforting in this direction and like trying to force this business to happen, but really unclear on my impact. And that was so stressful for me. Like hair was falling out stressful.
Yeah, and Natalie, you've been doing this for 18 years, building a company without fundraising. And remote too, when it was difficult to do remote. Can you talk more about your experience, your stress triggers, and how that's evolved over time?
My kids?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
No, that doesn't count. I think two things really stress me out. One is when things are out of my control, and that's just and I'm really good at looking at things and saying, this is not in my control and it's okay, but when it should be mine. So, I'm very close with my team and I really love people. And so like when there's things that fall apart there, it creates a lot of stress and anxiety for me. And I think the other one is when I'm not in control of my mind and I'm not able to produce good work. So it doesn't mean a lot of work. We only work 32 hours a week, the whole company, so it's not a time thing. It's a quality of work thing. So there's moments where, your mind's just my mind's just foggy, and I can't get past it. And if I'm looking at my notebook and I'm like, nothing's there, then that starts creating a lot of anxiety, and then that's like a spiral, right? Because then it's anxiety, my mind's more foggy, I'm not doing good work. So it's like that spiral, and getting out of that spiral is really important to me, but I do, that happens more often than anything else, honestly, is like that kind of, if I run too long and if I don't stop myself and really sit down and figure out what's going on, then I can really spiral into like a lot of stress.
It's like looking in your mental refrigerator, like when there's nothing in the fridge, but you just keep opening it.
Yeah,
You're like, something will come up, and then nothing ever happens.
Yeah, and no quality work comes out of that.
And Amina, how do you help your clients? Because I'm sure that's a common thing that they experience. How do you help them remove themselves from that spiral?
Yeah, so I actually have a 3-step framework. So a lot of the times when we're feeling really stressed out, we're often telling ourselves a story. So I always ask people, what's the story that we're telling ourselves here? Or like, what's the voice of fear saying? And then we have common mindset blocks like limiting beliefs, upper limits, fixed versus growth mindset. So are we in any of those? And then can we find examples from our own lives where actually that's not true, where that story is like so far from the truth? And then once they're able to stand outside of that stressor and look at it and be like, wow, okay, that's outside of me, that doesn't define me, that's not who I am, it's kind of like this light switch moment.
That's a great answer. It reminds me of the difference between fear and danger, where danger is something real, fear is something that we imagine, and our imaginations are basically unlimited. So fear is the mind killer. Yeah. So Sean, is burnout avoidable? Let's set that up a little bit more. Is it avoidable if you're working on something that you really enjoy doing?
Being in the content business, there's a lot of like burnout industrial complex articles written where people say like, I burn out and then I took a 9-month trip to Cabo and I'm back, right? Or like millennials are all burnout and they can't even mail a package anymore. I remember that was that story in the New Yorker. It's real. Or it was a BuzzFeed story. And the thing I try and figure out is what's just hard work or what's just a trying time versus what is burnout. So I think hard work and trying really hard and challenge yourself is not avoidable. Like if you want to grow, that has to happen. And there is I think a group of people raised on these articles who think that hard work equals burnout and I need to then avoid it and stay comfortable. And that that is scary to me. But the flip side is also scary, where you just charge on through and don't think about your growth or your consequences, and then you do end up burnout. So I think the way in which it's preventable is knowing which side of that very thin line you're on and being really honest with yourself. Are you just avoiding hard work, or are you truly burnout?
And you would, I imagine, have a pretty good answer to this, because you guys have built your whole company. You just talked about a 32 work hour week, where you guys are really focused on this quality of work and really setting the boundaries for the company as to what this work-life balance really means, not just talk about it, basically.
Yeah, I think, I work with really brilliant people, and so it's been over the years this kind of challenge. We started with a 40-hour work week, and then I would be all like, don't work on Saturday, and if you're on Saturday, I'll like start yelling at people. I'm like, stop working on Saturday. And then we kind of, you start realizing like, well, people really love what they do, like they're passionate about it, right? And so that kind of question, like if you're really excited about something that you're doing, you are going to wake up and think about it, and you're going to go to bed think about it. And entrepreneurs, my theory is that we are always thinking about it. It never goes away, and that's okay. Like, we're not going to stop that. I think the important thing for us at our company that we try to help our team with, and then honestly to each other, is that if you are going to run at 100 miles an hour, like there has to be a finish point, and there has to be a break in the end. And that's what we just really strive for, is like, there are moments, like we're launching a new product, or we launched a new product, I guess, technically. And, it's 3.5 years of work. I don't know, it was a lot. And, and there were moments where like the team just wanted to drive, right? Like just run and run and run and get it to customers and feel, and it would be really silly for me to say, stop it. Like, that's ridiculous, right? Because they're excited and it's actually fueling them, and there's all kinds of psychologically, like they're gaining that, that self, the accomplishment of self, right? But there has to be that end. And so what we try to do is then we pay attention to it, right? And we say like, okay, this is unhealthy, this, right? And we kind of have this very open dialogue, but it'll be like, you're going crazy, right? Like, this is not sustainable. Yes, okay, let's agree. And then it's like, well, when are we ending this, right? Like, what's the finish line? And then our job is to make sure that there's a finish line, and then usually, in practical sense, it looks like a vacation. So it'll be like, we'll pay for the team, the person to like go away for a couple days, because sometimes you say go away, and they're like, well, I don't have the money. Okay, fine, I'll pay for it. Just go, please. Take a break, take a mental health break, go spend time with your family. So I think you can enjoy work and work really hard and not burn out. But if you don't have that finish line, and if you're running at 100 miles an hour and you just keep running and keep running and keep running, you can absolutely burn out doing something you love. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs who love their businesses who burned out and died, right? And so the people didn't die, the businesses died. And so, I think that's absolutely something they loved, and they just couldn't sustain it.
This is a really interesting point that comes to another interview that I did a long time ago with Keith Raboy, and he said that it's about inputs to outputs. If you're doing a lot of inputs and you're not getting the outputs that you want to look at something there, and that's the thing that'll cause you to burn out. Go for it.
There is sometimes like you think the output's there, right? That's the dangerous path, right?
I've been there.
Yeah, where you think the output's there. Like, I've had engineers on my team who are like, no, this is great. I'm like, you've rewritten this 4 times. Like, you got to stop, right? Like, that's the longer output, right? And so I think there is, and on a team, like, that's my leadership's responsibility to catch that, right? Because sometimes people don't notice.
Yeah, I've seen, you say finish lines, but I think about like milestones, like progress, and I've seen like milestone fudging. We're like, well, we wanted to get to 10, but we got to like 1.5, and that's progress, so we're just going to keep going. And that, I can find that leads to delusion, or like burnout, yeah.
Delusion, yes. It's 4.5 years of building a product.
Right.
Yeah, call it what you want.
Yeah. So you're in a bigger company, Sean, and how many employees are?
I think it's 850.
850.
Something like that, yeah.
And how do you guys structure this? What are your thoughts on kind of on stress with either managers, executives, or individual contributors?
I think you can't have a remote company and not trust people with that autonomy. So there's 2 things which I find helpful. One, we keep Sabbath hours, so every Friday at, I think, 3 p.m. East Coast time, the company's done for the day. You can shut off Slack and keep working if you want, but you are not expected to be present and online. And that little bit of time, especially in the summer where you can get away, is incredibly, it makes it a huge difference. So that, but also the idea of, I'm a manager, and we're taught to trust our employees, our individual contributors and our team to manage their schedule accordingly, right? I think one thing that happens when you're an individual contributor, and especially if remote job is your first job, which is extra hard, is you need a lot of quiet self-confidence, right? You can't look around the office and go like, oh, everyone's busy like me, or I'm the only one busy, why? Or that team's really stressful, so I'll leave them alone, and that's why they're not getting back to me. You lose all of that context. And the thing that I find most helpful is knowing that most of your insecurity is probably in your head. And to have trust that, the one or two things you're measured against, to stay in communication, to check yourself against that. And if all that's okay, then you can let the more subtle stuff slide away. And I think that helps people stay focused.
I feel like, Amina, you would have something interesting to say about how employees can kind of, you already said it with the three-step process, but do you have anything to add? Or actually, let me ask you a better question. Somebody has 20 minutes to practice something a day. What do you suggest that they practice?
Yeah, so I think that we all have different, what I call nourishment codes. So we all require different things to feel whole, full, and nourished. Some of us might really benefit from, maybe we process our emotions through movement, or maybe we are better sitting still and being mindful and meditating. We all sort of process a little differently and have these different nourishment codes. So I always invite people to think about, well, what's going to fill them up the most? What's going to feel the best for them, and prioritize, and then come up with a process or a practice that's really specific and unique to them, and then have some non-negotiables around it. So one of my non-negotiables is yes, I process emotion through movement, and I love to meditate, and I eat healthy. My non-negotiable, though, is meditation twice a day. And that will always happen regardless of how busy I am, but maybe the workout gets cut out. But if you have your core, I think it's really...
How can somebody think about setting that core? For themselves? I guess it's an individual question, but how can they think about those boundaries in which they will not allow those things to not happen?
Yeah, so I always invite people to, for the non-negotiables, schedule them like you would a meeting. So we were talking about how oftentimes you'll go straight to work, from bed, you'll wake up, 10 minutes, you're working. So for me, the first thing I do is I'll meditate, and it's on the calendar, and my assistant knows never to book me, I am meditating. And so if it's on the calendar, I'm honoring it the same way that I would a meeting.
And the best advice I ever got from another manager is sometimes you gotta let things burn. And what I mean by that is if you woke up and you were gonna meditate and someone was like, oh my God, I need your help, you would have to go, this is my time.
Yeah.
We've talked about this. We've agreed upon this.
Right. And also,
that's a lot of confidence and discipline to do that. And that's very hard, right?
It is. It's boundaries. And then also knowing that I'm going to show up and problem solve and solution so much better if I've had my me time and I'm full and taken care of.
That's great. So I want to switch it over to remote, and what are the stresses within the remote context, and what are some sources of stress that exist within this remote context that are really hard, if you can remember them when you first started, and then as it's evolved, over these 18 years of doing it, what has changed?
Well, it started with you couldn't get in touch with anybody, so that was kind of hard. So there would be, the business started out as client services, and there were definitely moments where you're like, is my remote person going to show up to work today and do the work that the client asked? So that's a whole different kind of stress. Sean said something really smart that I love, and I'm probably going to steal, but that whole idea of that confidence that you have to build is really critical, because humans thrive on that interaction, and we get a lot of feedback on not just words, right? And especially not typed words. We have to hear the words, we have to see people's reactions when they say the words, and when you work in a remote team, you have to build that own confidence, and that the lack of confidence on both sides of the manager and the individual contributor can really create massive anxieties. And we have this kind of really big policy of I call it we don't do passive aggressiveness, but it's probably deeper than that, where you're not allowed to go home questioning whether or not somebody's mad at you. And that's a really important thing, because what it translates to is if you have some weird disagreement, 99% of the time it's not a real thing, you're imagining it, but remote work makes it hard, and so you got to address it. We're all adults here. By the time it gets escalated to me, I'm really mad at you for not being an adult and talking to your coworkers. But I won't let my promise to my team whenever I do my onboarding call, it's you're always going to know if Natalie's mad at you. You're never going to go home and question whether Natalie's mad at you, and that has to kind of pass down, because it's really easy for one little thing, a hi instead of a hey. All of a sudden, it's oh, hold on a second, why is it a hi, not a hey?
With a period, too.
Yeah, with a period, not an exclamation
Yeah,
mark. Yeah, and that's the kind of stuff that early on, I'm a people person. I love people. That's my favorite part of my job. And so I read into things really carefully. And early on, it would be like, oh my God, I haven't heard from this person. Are they mad? Are they quitting? Are they looking for another job? What's going on, right? That's from my perspective. And I know that from the employee's perspective, there's been like, Natalie, I don't know if so-and-so is bad at me. I haven't heard from them in 3 days. Like, maybe I said something funny. And it's like, hold on a second. And not, like I said, 99% of the time, it's not real. And those, I think, are the most important stressors. And the other one that I think makes remote work crazy hard, and that I coach, it's the first thing I coach for remote employees, is you got to over-communicate. Like, the hardest part of remote work is that you don't get checked off as present by physically being there. Everybody's got to know what you're, and I don't mean that, we're not in Slack, like we're very focused on focus work, but you got to communicate, like what you're working on, when you need help, when you don't need help, when you have to help somebody else, like you got to really, you got to pile it all in. And the biggest issues that happen that cause stress is when somebody doesn't communicate. And that's just a massive trust breach. Breach of trust is probably the proper English. And so that's just, stress just piles on from there.
Do you guys do like daily stand-ups, or
No.
you just say over communicate when you need it?
Yeah, so we have this, because we look at remote work as this gift to every individual to do their most meaningful work, like the gift of working from your home or from a quiet space is that you can do really great work without being disrupted. And so we make sure that we take that entire gift and bring it to the team, that you can't distract each other all day long. So we really maximize for quiet work. So everybody on the team has one 30-minute call on Mondays, and then one 30-minute one-on-one with their lead, and that's basically it. And then the rest of the 4 days that you work, I guess the rest of your 31 hours should be spent on you, or organizing your time into some kind of sprints of focus work. So we don't do stand-ups, but there's expectations. We work in small teams, so there's expectations that like those small teams are communicating as necessary, or if you're a software engineer, you're committing your code and you're pushing it up, and we know that that's happening. It's not like 4 days and what's going on, but we don't micromanage from that perspective because we have trust, but we do. When it's not worked out, it's always because like, where you been? I don't know what's going on, like, why have you been banging your head against the wall for 4 days and we don't know why, like that's the kind of stuff where it falls apart.
So Sean, I got a great question from the audience, and I think that would tie into what Natalie just said, and you guys probably have a policy on this. What do you think is more effective for remote work, working from home or some sort of co-working or office-based?
So the thing about working remote is everything's a video call, and you don't want to be the guy in Starbucks being like, yes, please file that, yes, yeah, ignore the espresso machine in the background. So I find my home is better, but I have a house, and when I lived in an apartment, that was not the case, and I absolutely did more. I paid for a co-working space. So I think it's more a private space in which when you are done working, you can leave that private space and interact with other humans in real life and not on video chat. That would be the criteria. Whether it's at your house or outside the house, I think is totally flexible.
Yeah.
I have strong opinions.
Yeah, go for it.
I have feelings.
Strong feelings. So I won't hire somebody unless they have a dedicated workspace that's private to them with a door.
No digital nomads?
No. And we are so obsessed with this focus work, right? Like you can't do 32 hours if you're in a coffee shop and then you're relocating here, and then somebody walks in and then somebody's disrupting you, and visual distraction is as bad as audio distraction, right? Like all these things. And so we will pay for a private co-working space if that's necessary, if your home doesn't allow for it. But I will not let anybody work from a coffee shop. Although I will say that I think we'll talk about this, but the loneliness from remote work is real, right? So we definitely have people going to coffee shops for a day or a half day, or finding their communities. That's totally fine. But your permanent workspace where you're getting your real focus work has to be with a door that closes.
I agree. When people write these, again, blog posts about being a digital nomad, and they're like, I worked from a Mexico City coffee shop, and then I flew to Peru. The anxiety I have when I don't know where the Wi-Fi is coming from that day is so real, and it probably makes me 20% less productive. And that stacked up, I think, matters. And I can't, to your point, imagine if I was supposed to do 32 hours of deep focus work, the idea of changing locations every day where I don't know where the outlet is, and I don't know where the Wi-Fi is, and I don't know if a school group is going to come in and be super loud is just stressing me out thinking about it.
Amina, do you have anything to add about this sense of particularly like with the entrepreneurs that you're working with and them setting up, are they setting up some remote companies and stuff like that? And what can you advise them to do about that?
Yeah, I mean, I love the passion and fervor here. So I actually work remotely with a lot of my clients, and I think you're absolutely right. Like firm boundaries, having a dedicated space where there's not people walking around in the background. And I did the co-working space thing where it was, like a group space, and then I had a private space. And if you don't have like zero distractions, you can't be fully present for the work. And it really does impacts how I show up, impacts how they show up. It's a big deal. And like you said, the stress of not knowing if the Wi-Fi signal is going to go in and out, like that alone will lead to burnout,
One of my favorite like remote work mini games is when people at the coffee shop, there's always a weird person over their corner who doesn't realize that they're on video to 100 people somewhere else.
That's funny. Amina, what about loneliness? How can remote entrepreneurs, people starting a company, how can they deal with loneliness?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it totally depends on our personalities and what type of connection we're craving, right? Sometimes people want mentorship. Sometimes people just want camaraderie and like the water cooler talk. And so I always ask people like what sort of connection they're looking for. And then based on that, do you need an advisory board? Do you need an accountability partner? Do you need to go to more networking events? Do you need to be at a co-working space? So really based on the type of connection they're looking for and then solutioning based on that.
Any kind of things you can throw out there for services like accountability services or good people to talk to and stuff like that? Mm-hmm.
So I don't know about any services for accountability partners, but I've always just like hustled my friends. So like I recently just, I just launched a journal and I needed an accountability partner to check in every week to be like, okay, I like hit my writing goal and it's off to the printer. And that can be just like the same way that we need buddies for fitness. Like we need buddies sometimes to help us get work over the finish line. And if we're solopreneurs, and I'm a solopreneur, I think it's really helpful to have that a sounding board or somebody that you can go to.
So you're saying like the social shame that if you didn't do it, she would take you out to coffee and be like, how's it going? You'd be like, oh, I didn't do it.
And I am so, that shame for me is just like insurmountable. I'm like, here's the pages, don't shame me.
I have a good accountability service that I can recommend, which is called FocusMate. You basically jump on a call with somebody for 50 minutes, and all you do is work. You set your 3 goals in the beginning, and then you work for 50 minutes, and then afterwards you tell everybody what it was like. It's great. It's great.
Love that.
It's remote too, so it's FocusMate.
But people you don't know?
People you don't know. Yeah.
It's like chat roulette, but productive.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That's like real shame, right?
That's, yeah.
Like, if my friend called me and was like, did you do your work? I'd be like, can we talk about something else?
Get off my back, Kyle.
Yeah, right?
And you can also do it with friends too. I've arranged co-working, it's really nerdy, but I've arranged remote co-working sessions with my friends where we throw up a video and do it. So this is a really good question from the audience, and Natalie, I think this will be good for you. If you really like the mission of your company and generally you're satisfied with your work-life balance and the money coming in, but you're constantly frustrated with everyone moving so slowly to the point you're starting to burn out while trying to push, would it worth it be keep trying, or is it better to leave?
Oh, that's deep. Who asked that?
It's anonymous.
Right, yeah, it's anonymous. My instinct, just because, I run the business, it would be like, did you talk to somebody, right? Because I think the reality is there's a mismatch of principles and values there, right? If your feeling is that the business, as a whole, it sounds like everybody's moving slow and you're the only moving fast, there's some mismatch in either goals or values or something. And I wouldn't quit until you talk to whoever's at the leadership team and figure out what that mismatch is, because it's possible. I'll tell you that like there's been people who have come to work for Wildbit and who've left because they're like, they don't think we're moving fast enough. And I'm cool with that. Like, that's fine. I've been around for 18 years and I'll probably be here for another 10 at least. So that's fine. That's the pace that I'm really happy with. But there's people who want to, I always think of lawyers, right? Like, I don't know, I have a lot of friends who are lawyers, but that's a choice to go into a law firm and you're going to run. You're going to work so hard, and you're going to work 90-hour weeks, and you're going to get beat up, and doctors too, right? Like, they go to residency, and they're getting beat up and all these things, and that's a choice. And you know that, and you go into that law firm. It would be silly to go into a law firm and say, I really want to, like, hang out and just kind of work 32 hours. That's okay. That's a choice. So I think it sounds like a decision that needs to be made or an understanding of where those differences lie. And maybe it's, I don't know, maybe you think you're working really fast, but maybe you're working on the wrong things, and that's possible too, and that you're working really hard on something, and the rest of the company's like, that's not really the important thing. So I would start there. And then, if that is a misalignment, then I would find something else, because what's the point, right?
It comes to mind for me is find a business coach, find somebody you can talk to personally who can give you feedback on what you're saying based on what you just said.
I also think from like the non-founder side that the founder has unlimited upside from working hard when the employees often do not. I mean, there's equity, and I know this isn't black and white.
No, you're 100% right.
And I find that some founders can't fathom a world in which your incentive structure doesn't match the founder, and they're like, why wouldn't you put in the extra 10 hours? And like the real talk answer is, I don't make more money when I do that. Yep. You do. And you see that a lot in like agencies, right? Probably when you started that agency, you saw things like that. And as a flip, I found jobs in which I worked with the founder and then leave. They take it so much more personally than just like a regular manager, because their work and identity are so tied together that by you saying, I'm out of here, and I'm curious if you ever felt this, that there's a part of them that feels like you're refuting them, not just the job.
That's deep. And so let's go back to, sorry, let's go back to your experience of burnout, because you've experienced burnout, and think before that, what wise words would you share with yourself at that time?
Oh, great. It's the identity thing. So I co-founded a local media company, right? And right after the recession, so it was local media recession, and I was a recent college grad, so it was like the worst combination of things for burnout. And I did it for 4 years, and I didn't have any context, right? I didn't know what different was, and I just thought work was always supposed to be that hard. And in fact, I would work 8 hours, and I would go home and eat, and I would get done, and I would immediately fire up the laptop and work till 1 a.m., and I would sleep, and I would miss out on people inviting me to things, and it just kept snowballing until I realized that I couldn't separate my identity from my job, and they're always tied in a little bit, but I couldn't even peel them apart in any way, where I said, if I stopped working tomorrow, what do I think of myself, and what do I do? And that was terrifying, and I realized if I didn't right then pull myself out, I would always be just my job, and I would just be this overworked person. I didn't like that. So I would encourage myself to either dial back and develop other parts of my identity, or say, you should have left a little earlier.
Yep, that's great. So Amina, in terms of remote work, to me somebody who would thrive in remote work is somebody who'd be an introvert, somebody who can kind of have not only an introvert, but can also manage their community outside of work. So a lot of people come into work to find community, but with remote work, it makes sense that it might be more difficult. You might have to do that on your own. What's your take on introverts, extroverts, how they can adapt to these environments, or if they should adapt to these environments?
Yeah, so I think that there are lots of different ways to look at personality types. So introvert, extrovert, Myers-Briggs, DISC assessment. All of those give us real insights into our personality and how we thrive, how we do the best work, how we feel the most taken care of, how we connect to people. So I would say really having people kind of explore those, and if they don't already have a strong understanding of themselves, and then decide like what they need and how they shape their community outside of that. But yeah, I think that introverts can feel really comfortable in a remote setting. Extroverts might want to be more in community, in a communal workspace. But I think that strong understanding of not just your working style, your communication style, and how you connect with others is super enlightening and helpful for the path forward. I also want to just talk about what you were saying about the connection of work and self-worth. Mm-hmm. For so many people, especially founders and entrepreneurs, they're so intrinsically tied, and we can't separate the two, and it really is tied to the burnout, and that was true for me too. I just wanted to echo that statement because I think it's super profound.
I think there's a myth that if you found something and it doesn't work out, that you will be like banished to Siberia and no one will ever hire you and you'll never recover. And I've yet to see that be true.
Yeah,
or you'll just die
from Siberia.
Yeah.
So there's
and they're like, it's not that bad, it's fine.
There's hope.
That actually reminds me of a question I've been thinking about a lot, is like what, for somebody who's been an entrepreneur like yourself and started a company and then gone back into a role where you're working at a company, not as the founder, how do you deal with that? Because for me, I actually haven't done that yet. I've always been a kind of a founder or entrepreneur, and I haven't gone into that company setting once I did that. How did you deal with that?
In what way?
So founders of companies have a lot more autonomy in the tasks that they yeah.
Yeah, one of the things, because I'm a little different because I did it right out of school, right? And one of the reasons I think I was burnt out is I didn't have mentorship, and I thought I need to be somewhere where everyone around me is so much better than me, and I need to learn. And I had to admit that to myself, that I have so much to learn, because I was 25, and when I joined a company, I joined Behance here in New York that got acquired by Adobe, and I was surrounded by some of the smartest people I knew. And that's when I thought, like, oh, I'm in the big leagues. Like, I have a lot to ground to make up here, and that helped me be humble. You know, when you sit in enough meetings and you go, you guys are really smart, and I have no idea what you're talking about, and I really need to brush up. Like, after that feeling happens a bunch of times, then. But you're right, I did arrive with a little chip on my shoulder. I was like, I started my own company, I can do this no problem. But I was wrong, totally wrong.
So yeah, why did you guys build a remote-only team in the first place?
So in 2000, Chris, my husband, he decided he tried to be a software developer and realized he was really bad at it. And he was doing client services work, and he needed a person. And there were user groups, and he found a person in Romania, and it was like, we got nothing to lose, right? Western Union, which is now a brand that's advertising. It's very interesting. Western Union, you just wired money and hope for the best, and you're young, and it was easy. And I think a lot of it really early on was a cost thing too, right? Like we were able to, I'm Russian, I'm from St. Petersburg, and we were able to find people in St. Petersburg and in Russia, and they were making a great living for living in Russia, and we were able to actually like pay our bills with client work and do all that kind of stuff. And so it kind of started that way. It's massively evolved, like the money thing is not a thing, right? But the opportunity to hire brilliant people from all over the world is, one of the biggest gifts. And most of our, over the years, if you look at everybody who's worked for us, most of them are not in the U.S. Now we have a majority in the U.S., but we started, for the maybe 10 of the 18 years, it was not in the U.S. and just some of the smartest, most wonderful humans on the planet who were, we have the exposure to. And now I think also, we're so obsessed with business being for the purpose of the people. Like that's what that's what Chris and I believe a business exists for, is to actually support and create for people, not the other way around. Like we should not be a slave to the business. Like we created it, so we harness it and we make it do for us what it's supposed to do, right? That's the point. And so that means that when you can do remote properly, you create opportunities for people anywhere from home that's much more fulfilling, right? Like you can grab your kids from the bus stop every day, right? You can take your dry cleaning out. You can go on a 2-hour bike ride if that's what you do. We have 2 people on our team who are pilots, private pilots. And the only reason they were able to do that is because on a beautiful day, they're like, we're going to go take a test. It's like, go for it, And those are the kind of opportunities that I think creating your own schedule, working on your own time, and, and that's what remote does, enables for life, for like people's lives. And I think that's really meaningful.
Interesting. That's actually a very similar story to the last one we did in San Francisco. Sid, the CEO of GitLab, had a very similar story where he found his co-founder on a Usernet, and they started a company, and it had to be remote by default. So organic usually is a great way to go. So work-life balance and growth and venture capital and stress, pressure to succeed. I interviewed before, and I haven't published this interview, but I loved your take on it, which is just like, how do you deal with this hype of like, you have to be a $1 billion company, you have to be a $7 billion company?
Yeah.
And raise money, sorry.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think, I don't remember the answer that I gave you last time, hopefully it's the same one. I think for Chris and I, there's a couple things. One is, I want to do the things that I want to do, like have a 32-hour work week, and I don't want to have anybody to answer to, right? The other thing is that to be able to grow at a pace that's sustainable guarantees my ability to grow for a long time. And that is financially for Chris and I much more, like that's a much better outcome, right? For my team, it's a much better outcome. And I think for the world, it's a much better outcome, right? Like we can do something that's meaningful, sustainable for a long time. I also, we've spent a lot of time, we started off bootstrapped, and then, and nobody knew who we were, and then eventually, we become a big company, and we get tons of inbound, like all the time. And it's actually doing it this way, like the sustainable, profitable way, has made us a much more attractive target. Where I'm saying no, I have a snippet that just says like, no, thank you, no, thank you. And I don't mean that to brag. I mean that like if there's a point in our life where we saw a necessity to raise money, or to do a PE round and walk away or whatever, like it would be much easier because I've proven that I can do something with actual customer funds in a meaningful, sustainable, profitable way, right? And that's just a much more valuable asset than a hypothetical, maybe this will work out, my chances of success are less than 1%, you know, that kind of thing. So if you can pull it off, I mean, for us, there's just a lot of control, there's a lot of opportunities to do what we want. Financially, honestly, I'm friends with a lot of startup founders, they don't pay themselves very well when they raise money, and it takes a long time to make money if you ever do, and like, profits are my income, right? So like, I can control that in a way that is, you know, meaningful to our family and to my team. Like I can raise salaries as much as I want, and I can pay. We used to like do all these crazy bonuses and stuff like that. And I didn't know how to do math back then. We used to do 10% bonuses twice a year, 10% raises twice a year. It was really, math is not my subject. Before I had a finance director. But that's the kind of stuff that I can control, right? But ultimately I'm building an asset that's really valuable. And if we ever needed, you know, if anything ever, God forbid, happened to our families or whatever, and we needed to make a decision, it's a much more valuable asset.
So I want to come back to that. There's a great question about that, about staying positive, but I want to reach out to you guys as well. There's one great question for Amina, which is, many startups not web-based face the challenge of acquiring new clients, which leads to burnout. Any tips on business development and avoiding that?
Yeah, so business development, sales, and mindset are so intrinsically tied, and it's really about cultivating mindset of resilience. So a lot of the times we meet resistance and we think, okay, I failed, right? But resistance is just information for us. So it's really about being in the growth mindset and being like, okay, you know, why wasn't I able to close this deal? You know, really being in discovery, where in the process was I maybe not showing up strong enough? What else did this potential client want that I wasn't delivering to them? What are competitors giving them that I'm not? So really using it as a moment of discovery instead of saying that this resistance means something about me. And then as soon as you're in discovery, you're solutioning. So you're like, okay, so the next go around, this next sales conversation that I'm having, I'm showing up totally differently, and the chances of me closing are so much better.
So it's information. It's just
everything's information.
I love that.
And you probably, for somebody who says no, you probably don't want them to say yes, because I mean, the most difficult thing I've faced in this recent, it's all very present for me, is oftentimes you won't hear no's, you'll often hear silence. That's the most difficult part. And when somebody gives you a no, it's a gift. But that NO, when you see that on a written thing or when you hear that, there's an immediate emotional like heaviness to it, for me at least. What do you think about that?
Yeah, oftentimes we feel like it's a no to us, but sometimes it means not now. And my favorite question to ask is, can you think of a reason why you wouldn't want to move forward? Because there's an opportunity for them to give you feedback right away and get really clear on what you weren't delivering for them that they wanted. And when you ask people that question to their face, people are going to give you an answer.
Important phone calls, not text as well. That's
yes, yeah. FaceTime, Zoom, for those kinds of conversations, I think are super powerful.
So Sean, going back to the thing we were talking about earlier, kind of in opposition to a bootstrapped company with no money, you're in a company that has raised venture capital, big company, you guys have grown. When did InVision start?
Oh God, 2013, 14? Don't hold me to that.
14. So yeah, not too long, they've grown to a company of 800, 900 people. How long did you see that? How many employees were there when you started?
So I've only been there 8 months.
Okay.
So I'm at this tail end of most recent growth, I'd say.
And so what is it like to be in this kind of, it's so interesting because it's one of the largest companies that's fully distributed outside of Automatic. Maybe Automatic might be,
Yeah.
It's so interesting to think about a machine like that that's fully distributed. Can you talk more about what it's like to be in that?
Actually, I don't understand. I would have a hard time working for a company that wasn't all remote because everyone can empathize and knows the barriers of communication. If I worked for a company where the office was centralized and I was part of a smattering elsewhere, I would find that really tough and really hard. So I actually think everyone having a shared experience makes it possible. I would, if InVision tomorrow announced we're having one San Francisco office, I would be really sad because I think that would irreparably harm the culture of the company.
So there is a question of distributed from the get-go, all distributed
right,
versus a team.
Right, and the company's built around collaboration software, right, and the idea of asynchronous collaboration. It's to the root and the idea of co-ownership, that everyone has the autonomy to set up their day and run their particular department and part of the business, according to their values, and that is just borne out by the remote. By setting up remote, we're living the value by doing that.
Interesting. So let's go back to your experience building a bootstrapped company. Initial challenges, really difficult experiences happening. how do you stay positive through that? Do you need to stay positive? Is that?
All negative. You know, you guys have been talking about it, and I realized that one of the biggest growth, I guess, moments for myself was realizing how much these things aren't personal, right? So like
Right.
all of this, like, so to your talk about like staying positive, has to be that moment was a moment for me where it was like, when I realized that the person leaving wasn't about me, when the no wasn't about me, when the whatever wasn't about me, then I was like, okay, then now I can kind of separate the two and I can keep moving forward. For us, I think early on, honestly, like we didn't know any better. And I mean, we're talking like Beanstalk launched when there was an app launching a quarter, a month, I don't know, every 2 months. Like we launched Beanstalk and like Basecamp tweeted about it. I don't know if people know Basecamp. Basecamp tweeted about it, or blogged about it actually, because like it wasn't happening. So there wasn't this massive, oh my God, you have to raise money to compete. That's the only way. Now I compete against only like 600-pound gorillas, just massively funded companies. And there's a couple places where the stress comes in. I think there's the practical sense of I don't have that much money, right? Like I don't have that much disposable income. I can't compete in marketing dollars. I can't compete, in other ways. I don't do, stock options or anything like that. And so like there's that part that, you kind of stress out about and think about. And I think the other part is we learned this really early on when one of our largest competitors raised money and immediately had this whole book of customers that were like these massive customers. Oh, yeah. And we were like, how did that happen? Like what, and you realize very quickly, like with that investment comes mentorship and connections, right? And so the two things that Chris and I have always talked about, and probably even less the customers than the mentorship was definitely something that we've envied other, companies who've raised money because, you're sitting at a table, your boardroom's filled with some really smart people. But on the flip side of like, is that worth it? No. On the flip side of that is create your own boardroom, right? Like figure out a way. We go on retreats with, and with people who have companies that you all know, that we spend time with. We have our own private Slack rooms where we talk about stuff and, we've created, it's a lot of work, but you can create that boardroom of like-minded entrepreneurs or founders or sometimes not even founders, who are growing businesses and trying to figure that out, and you can kind of find your way. It took us a long time to realize the value of that once we had it. We always knew we envied the teams that did. And so that's kind of been the two biggest stresses is like when we've sat down and said, we used to do this exercise where every once in a while we'd like get an offer for some, we'll take calls every once in a while and we'll like sit down and say, all right, if we had $1 million in cash, how would we spend it? And Chris would write his own list and I would write my own list and we'd come out and we'd like spend $200,000. And I'm like, well, okay, I can get a bank loan for that, And because, I don't have this put $2 in, take $3 out, right? Kind of like process because we're just a different type of company. And so we've never had that desire to raise money for the sake of growing faster. It was always for, can we create, can I have mentorship of these just brilliant people that, I just don't get close to because we're not in the same league.
And that's the really important point. Find advisors and give them a skin in the game. Get them to have skin in the game. Give them a piece of equity, whatever it takes to get the smart people on board if you're not raising money.
Advisors and friends, I really do. There's something meaningful that we learned. It always looks rosier on the other side, like you're fighting a fire and everything looks bad and you're like, we're so unorganized and our servers are blowing up and we don't know how to do bookkeeping and everything is horrible. And over there is this amazing company that wrote this blog post where everything's so perfect and wonderful. And then you go to the bar and you're drinking with them and they're literally fighting the same fires, they're just bigger. And it's like, but entrepreneurship is lonely sometimes, right? And there is this it's nice to know that like, oh, we're not so bad. The biggest companies, are fighting some nasty fires and it's okay.
That's a great point. Sean, one challenge a lot of remote workers face is FOMO, water cooler talk, office celebrations and more. How can an office team offer them a seat at the table? So I guess, you guys are remote, but how?
If it was mixed, yeah. Right? I had a job where some of the team was remote and it was about making sure that person was there at a regular interval and that they had a space every time. So it was the idea like, oh, we're gonna talk to Mary on the Thursday she comes because she comes every Thursday, right? And then they don't just show up and they're a surprise and they're just kind of like oddly on the outside and they don't have a desk. And I feel like that's a lot of little signals that that person doesn't belong. So I think it's building in the space for that person or those teams to be present. But I do think if you have some remote workers, you do need to get together in physical space, at some interval. I don't know what you guys do with the people not in North America, but I would find it really hard to work if I never got to see the office.
So we've done whole company retreats for 14 years.
Like every year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've been around for 18, so I guess like 4
Ish.
years in. Yeah. I'm just trying to think. I think one or 2 years we had them twice a year. But so we bring everybody into a place, and when we were mostly in Europe, we went to Europe. Now we're mostly in the U.S., so we come to the U.S. We do that. We bring people in. Periodically, we'll do like smaller retreats. I think one of the things that I've found that's like really important is you still, and I'm so curious how you guys do this, but like there's deep strategic conversations that have to happen in person.
I agree.
Like I don't know how you do that on a 4-hour Zoom call for 3 days. Like I just don't think you'll get that. You need to take a walk together. You need to think about stuff. So we do quarterly planning. The whole leadership team comes into one space. We sit down and plan. We'll have smaller, like the customer success team will fly in together somewhere so that they can talk about stuff. It's expensive, it's hard, but it's in our budget, and we just it has to happen because I just don't think we can get. And actually, we did one quarterly meeting where we didn't all fly in, and it's like, all right, everybody, go plan. Come back in an hour. And tell me what you planned. Because you just can't. It just didn't work, and so I think it's really important to get that human time.
Yeah, and this may be controversial, but I think if someone is remote and they're one of the only remote people and everyone else is in the office, it's going to stunt their career growth, right? They're not around, they're not front of mind. And for some people, that's okay, right? The reason they're remote is so they spend more time with their family, and that is a trade-off they're willing to make. But I do feel if someone is trying to, build in title or salary or responsibility, being remote when everyone else is not remote is putting you at a disadvantage.
I think that's totally true, and that's really hard. And I've talked to people because we have this like Philly kind of office that the team calls like the Philly co-working space because we all have private offices, so we don't see each other ever. Because we only have private offices in general, so it basically doesn't exist. But people will ask like, how do you run a hybrid solution? And I'll be like, well, how many people? We have 3 remote and 60 in the office. I'm like, well, that's really hard, right? Like those 3 people, no matter what you do, because our solution is we run remote first. So even if 2 people are in the office and 1 person is remote, every call is done on a Zoom on their own computer in their own office, right? Like little things like that where no decision gets made that doesn't get posted up so that everybody can see it, right? Meetings, and that's the kind of stuff you run remote first because this way you make sure that to the best of your ability, you're not creating that like separation and then you don't want your whole leadership team in one city.
Right.
You want that distributed too, so that you kind of make conscious decisions. But if you only have 3 people, I don't know. I give them 2 years.
Yeah.
I think it's really hard.
Amina, how do you gain trust with your remote employees without being a crazy micromanager? I'm sure you've seen some of your clients dealing with this question a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah, so trust is a muscle, and also, everybody works differently too. So some people do want that high touch and they want to be checked in with regularly, and some people want to be entirely autonomous. So I think it's really about creating high psychological safety where people feel like they can actually say, hey, this is how I want to be managed, and this is how I want to connect, and I can speak my piece and have a really truthful and honest conversation with you and trust that you're going to do right by me. But I think it really is about cultivating that psychological safety where people feel like they can grow and be taken care of and say what they need to say.
And communication, it seems like, too, communicating that with the employee and being really upfront and honest. What's the nature of truth in that? Like, how can you be more honest with the people you're working with and stuff, and the people who are working with you?
Say what you want to say. I mean, when you're cultivating that high psychological safety where people don't feel like they're going to be penalized if they speak the truth, they're going to speak the truth. A lot of the times we are reticent or we hold back because we feel like if we truthfully express ourselves, it's going to negatively impact our growth trajectory. But if you're really cultivating that trust and allowing people to be themselves, they're going to be honest.
I feel like both of you guys might have something to say on this, too.
Yeah, I never realized how much my collaborative and creative process was me getting into a room and fighting with somebody until I worked remote, and then you can't do that. And so how do you have a disagreement in a remote way that's not kind of catty and weird is actually something I'm still trying to figure out. Let me know if you have any advice. But it comes down to trust, right? Is the idea of I know the thing that if I don't do, what would make me lose my job. Like, I know that if I miss something so hard, there's probably one or two things in all of our work that if we don't do those things, we're in trouble. And anything outside of that, I think, is a discussion, and it's worth pushing on and worth exploring more.
That psychological safety is everything. I guess I add, just from my perspective, is like, it's my job to make sure that I demonstrate it and not just say it. And so, I'll have, like, with almost everybody on my team, there will become a point where, like, I'm sitting down and saying, something happened and it didn't make me happy and I want to talk about it. And you're not fired. You're not even remotely close to being fired, but this thing happened. We got to talk about it. I got to understand why you did the thing that you did. I got to understand why I don't like why you did it and why there's a disconnect. And that first time is always this, like, okay, this is legit. Like, we can actually have these conversations. And the next time they're coming to me and saying, like, this isn't right and whatever. And I remember, like, a million years ago, we were at an event, and somebody had gone up and said, they did this talk, and they said to the boss, please go home. Like, go home at 5 o'clock. Like, don't talk about going home at 5 o'clock and stay till 8, right? And that always resonated with me in, like, everything we do. Like, we talk a lot, but if we're not demonstrating that ourselves and, obviously your leadership team, then I don't think anybody's going to believe in psychological safety if it's not exhibited to them, like, in actual behavior.
Not just in speech. It doesn't have to be crazy at work is a great book if anybody wants to follow up on that.
I'm also a big fan as a manager doing the start, stop, continue, because you let people compliment but also say the thing. So he's like, what should I start doing? What should I stop doing? What should I continue doing? And that stop for me as the manager has been, like, very revelatory. Like, sometimes I have no idea. It could be anything from, like, you talk too much when you start a meeting and you're like, or hey, I wish you gave me more feedback. I did something I thought was very good and you didn't compliment me. And I think that doing that once a month or once every 2 months is really helpful for building that trust.
So we got a couple minutes left, and I think there's an important topic that we should talk about, which is essentially contracting, because now we've got a system of economy now where there's a lot of contractors out there, particularly in remote work. Distributed companies have a different way of hiring that lends itself to bringing on a whole bunch of contractors at one time. This is an open question for anybody who wants to take it. How do you guys envision contract work versus stable? I forget the word, full-time.
How do we treat them differently?
Yeah, how do you treat it? What are your thoughts on contractors, on bringing contractors onto the team, and how that works?
Do you guys hire contractors?
I hire a lot of freelance writers, so they're contractors, but those are always, like, very short engagements, or every Friday you're gonna write this thing, and I feel like it's much more structured than someone who's more in a service capacity. So I feel like I have it on easy mode when it comes to contractors. But I don't know if you do any contractors.
Yeah, I was a contractor for a long time, so I'm sure I have a lot to say about it. Can you ask more specifically, like, what you're looking for?
So the question is, hiring remote workers, including contractors, opens you up to more talent options, albeit stressful for those considering an all remote workforce. What's the number one thing they need to adopt?
I think when we talked about that quiet self-confidence, I think I like hiring people with an opinion, and even if I disagree with the opinion, I know that they have a conviction and they will see it through and they will push me on my conviction, and then once we come to a consensus, they believe in it so much that they can help that momentum carry them forward. They don't have people in the office giving you the attaboy all the time, and I think that needs to come from, like, a very deep personality level, and that's why I think it's really hard for people's first job to be a remote job, because I think you only get that through reps and experience.
A great point that somebody recently brought up to me was essentially that a lot of people come to San Francisco. I'm originally from San Francisco. I live in San Francisco. A lot of people come to San Francisco after college in order to work at a company so they can extend that college experience into a new work experience. So that's where they can kind of get so if you're thinking about remote work, you might want to go do that first, unless you're really motivated and you have a good ability to make community outside of your workspace. Yeah. So on the Masters of Scale podcast, Barry Diller said, when you burn out on your vision, when you've reached the burnout plateau, that is the time to launch. Do you agree? So essentially, from what I'm getting from this question is, you're experiencing a lot of burnout, you're self-doubt, and you're kind of up against everything. You're in the pit of despair. When you're just like, this idea sucks. Yeah, and I wasted my time 3 years on this.
And then you launch?
He was saying that's the time.
There's usually self-doubt and burnout, and also that's a thing a person can say when they've already succeeded, right?
Yeah.
But he's also right in that everyone who succeeded has gone through that, right? So it's hard to tell in the moment. I don't think it's a blanket.
I've got a great quote from Nietzsche, which is, when you stare into the abyss stares back. So I don't know if that's helpful. But basically, it's like, in those times of challenge, if you're going to do something worthwhile, you're going to experience them, and there's no way around it. You just have to do it.
Can I speak to the self? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Can I just address the self-doubt really quickly? So we're always going to face self-doubt, and the best way to begin is to begin. And so launching when you're not ready, but being in discovery around like what getting the feedback, because you'll never be ready. There'll always be doubt, but being on the court and getting the information that you need to evolve and pivot is the game that you want to be in. Because we'll always be doubting ourselves, but you want to get it out there so you can get information so you can keep going.
Yes. How is it to work with your spouse? And how is it to separate life, your personal life with your work life? I think it's actually much easier to work with your spouse. And I think I believe, in just my experience, is that entrepreneurship doesn't turn off. And so when you're building something that you're really excited about, you're really excited about all the time. And we're really lucky that we get to continue that excitement at home without having any conflict between like two different career paths. So for us, it's actually like we fear a time where we won't work together. Like if one of us veers into something that they get really excited about and we're splitting, like I don't know how we'll process that because we're on vacation at dinner talking about the business, right? We tell the kids about the business, right? We tell the kids about when we hire somebody new, and I have two daughters, and so like we love talking around the table about that. If we had to talk about two different career paths and like compete for that time and space in our family, I think it would be much more challenging. But we like each other a lot, so that helps, So I think that obviously you have to have that too.
Yeah, and I think it was Marissa Meyer, one of the early Google employees. There was a relationship, in an office relationship that worked out as well. That I believe worked out, but yeah. But thank you guys so much. This has been a really great.
Yeah.